everyone. So I'm really excited for this video because I get to show you other people's container gardens. And I have so many submissions, so thank you so much for everyone that submitted their garden. I think I actually have enough where this is going to be split into 2 videos so that I don't have a 2-hour-long video. Oh, looks like Penelope wants to come join us. Come on, Penelope. So the reason that I wanted to do this video is kind of related to the reason why I started my channel in the first place, because I was looking for gardening videos on YouTube and I couldn't find anyone that was in my exact environment where it was just gardening all in containers on a deck. So that's why I originally started to make videos so that I could show other people who had similar environments that you can garden without a yard as well. But of course, my outdoor space can be very different from other people's outdoor spaces, even if we're all gardening on a deck or a balcony. So I know that for me, my decks are pretty large. Now, if you had a yard and you came to my garden, you would probably say it's a small garden. But compared to other outdoor spaces, especially balconies that I've had at previous places I've lived in the city, my decks are gigantic, at least in my opinion. So both of my decks are about 18 by 19 square feet and they both get full sun. So it is a very specific growing environment. So that's why I wanted to share other container gardens, just in case your environment might be more similar to some of these. You can see what people are growing. And I have included some social media handles. So I realized when I was about halfway through with the submissions that I didn't have a spot for your social media account. I did try to find some of them, and then I added a new field for the last half. So if your social media handle is not included in this video, post it in the comments down below, but I will also list everyone in the description so that if there's someone with a container garden that seems like it'd be helpful to follow along, you can easily find them. Now, this video is not just going to have container gardeners in it because I wanted to include people that might have a yard but have a section of their garden that is just containers. So I know there are some people in here who have a section of pots, even though they also do have a yard, or a section that's all elevated beds, because you can still get a lot of inspiration from other parts of people's gardens, even if they also do have a yard. So I'm just gonna start off on the list here in the order that they were sent in. And like I said, I think this is gonna be a 2-part video. But first up is a container garden from Jordan, who's also in Chicago. Also, I do apologize if I mispronounce anyone's name. Jordan is in growing zone 6A, and she has a balcony container garden space in the South Loop. So this is one of those instances that I was talking about. Again, my decks are all full sun all day, very hot, whereas this is a deck, and it's been similar to decks I've lived in the past, where there is a roof. But because of the angle of the sun, it looks like you get a pretty good amount of light throughout the day. Like, it seems like with the angle of what I can see here, the sun is hitting all the way back to the back wall of your balcony garden, and it looks so colorful. I feel like this is my favorite color. Well, my favorite color combination is all of the colors together, but if I am narrowing it down to just a few colors, I don't know why, but orange, purple, and pink for me, I love. Maybe it's because it kind of has a Lisa Frank vibe to it. But I mean, this pot that I'm looking at seems like it's right up against your like apartment building. So next to where you enter, which would be the furthest back from the railing. And it looks like it's getting hit with a lot of sun. So I don't know if this is southern exposure or not, but one of the problems I had in the past when I had a deck similar to this, or a balcony similar to this, is it had west facing views. So it only got a few hours of afternoon sun, and most of my plants were not very happy because 1, they didn't get full sun, and 2, the sun that they did get was very intense. So it would burn the leaves because they were in shade most of the day and then just got hit with a few hours of super hot afternoon sun. But this looks fantastic. And again, the amount that you can fit, especially using your vertical space. So on the railing, it looks like, well, not only do you have lights, which I need to add more of those to my garden, but there are containers that look like there's some that are halfway up or maybe slightly more than halfway. There are pots that are growing in trellises. So really making use of that vertical space. It looks like there is some sort of elevated bed on the right here in this photo. Again, just as a tip, if you are searching for beds with legs for your container garden, look for elevated beds versus raised beds, because raised beds are often the ones that just have walls and no bottom because they're meant to sit on the ground. I almost made that mistake when I first tried to buy a raised bed. So search for elevated beds, and that should come up with things that are a bit more helpful there. Next up is Andreanne from Quebec City, Canada, growing zone 5. And the Instagram account is, let me try my French pronunciations, Jardin du 10, which I can at least recognize that garden and 10 are words in there, and it makes sense when I read the description of your garden, because it says that my 5-year-old son and I, garden on a 10-foot by 10-foot balcony for 3 years. We grow tomatoes, peppers, and even had a few zucchinis, peas, herbs, flowers. Everyone that comes to visit us is surprised by how much stuff we can grow in a very small scale. So let's take a look at your photos, and I obviously looked through some of these photos just to get an idea and see what was submitted, and I saw plenty with cats in them, and as a cat lover, I was very excited to see this. So the first thing that I noticed in the photos when I pulled them up was your 2 little kitties. I wish my cats were well behaved enough to hang out on the deck, but also with it being so far up off the ground, I don't know if I would trust their safety out there, but your cats look very comfortable and very relaxed. Again, one of the things I'm seeing right off the bat here is the use of the vertical space. So there are what I believe is the Super Chunia Vista bubblegum hanging there on the railing planters. I can't tell exactly how they are connected because they're not sitting right on top, but it's really cool that you're able to utilize that space where, oh, you know, they're probably hanging. Maybe they're like hanging frames and then you put the box in. But being able to utilize that space when you normally wouldn't even think that you would grow something on that. So I love that. I see some grow bags here, which are great. And it also looks like you have, I don't know if they're particular types of trays, but there are trays under the grow bags. That is something I did not do my first year. And I definitely recommend it because the grow bags, if you are gardening on a wooden surface, the grow bags hold moisture. And so it's kind of like leaving a sponge on wood. So I would definitely put something underneath it. Now I either have like plastic lifts under mine or I have caddies with wheels, just so they're not consistently moist sitting on that wood deck. I also see a lot of terracotta pots, and I like here too with that gray pot, which are those, can't tell if those are zinnia seedlings. I'm not sure what those are in the gray pot, but it looks like you've either tilted something upside down to put the pot on, or I don't know if that is meant to be a plant stand, but I really like that idea. And that's something I'm trying to incorporate more of in my garden, are ways to get the pots up, even if it's not all the way up like at railing height, but getting even more levels than that in my garden. So whether it is something like you're buying a plant stand specifically, or I have flipped over an empty pot before and used that as a lift underneath a pot that has a plant in it. So I really like that. Let's look at your next photo. I see a very happy kitty. I think this is one of the same ones from before, lying on its back. Also in those terracotta pots, is that a very small tomato plant? I think those are little tiny cherry tomatoes, but let me know if that's not correct. But again, I like the different uses of containers. I also like the different heights of the plants that you have. So you have some really tall plants that are even going over the railing, even though the pots are on the ground, but then also you have the pots hanging off of the railings. So again, just adding a bunch of different vertical interest into your garden. And then there is also here a close-up of zinnias. These are stunning. I absolutely love the neon yellow one. Is that a queen lime variety? I'm not sure, but zinnias are one of my favorite flowers, especially for smaller gardens like ours, because they are cut and come again. I have a video of my top, I don't know however many favorite flowers, but top flowers for small gardens. This is like #1. I think I would put this above anything else. I love dahlias, but for me, they didn't bloom till much later this season, so I have some trust issues with those. Gomphrena, those also bloom a little bit later, even though they are incredibly productive. But zinnias, to me, there's so many different varieties, so many different colors. They usually are one of the first blooming for me. I start my seeds inside March or April. I can't remember off the top of my head which round they're in, but they're usually blooming sometime in June and then bloom consistently until they're either taken out by the weather or powdery mildew. But I've made so many bouquets with those. That was the majority of the flowers I put in the bouquets that I gave away. So if you have a small space, I cannot more highly recommend growing zinnias in your garden. Next up is Christine, also from Chicago in Ukrainian Village, zone 6A. I have a balcony garden, second floor in a 4-floor, 6-unit building, second year gardening. We have raised beds and containers. I grow flowers and vegetables. So let's take a look at your photos here. So the first one I pulled up has a very happy looking puppy on a chair, and also I think more Supertunia Vista bubblegum in the railing planters. They do so well. If you are gonna do Supertunias, I think the best bang for your buck is the Proven Winners Supertunia Vista series specifically, because there are some Supertunias that aren't Vista, but Vista is just incredibly vigorous. What seems to be the most vigorous of the varieties are bubblegum and jazzberry. Those are my two favorites, like must have every year in the garden. But I love your railing planter looks like, and I don't know if this one, you did anything custom to it, like with the bolts on the side, or if it came like that, but it looks like yours is able to sit on top of the actual deck itself instead of something that's hanging over the side. So again, that just gives you even more height. This is also a great way too to add some privacy. Usually, if you're in a city, you're pretty close to your neighbors. So by having something that's on top of your railing, and then in that planter, having a very vigorous plant that creates almost like a mounding wall, great way to add privacy to your garden. But I absolutely love how those look in there. Let's pull up another view of your garden. Oh my gosh, yes. So this is the view of the very tall plants. It looks like those are sunflowers in a grow bag on a basket, which again, adding more vertical height to your space. Also another great way to create a wall, having giant sunflowers around. It also looks like there is a tomato plant in there growing in a cage, and then there is the raised bed next to it. And then, oh, a hammock. That's another thing that I think I want to add to our garden is a hammock, just so that we have some space to kind of lay down and relax. I do have a little couch now, but it's not really long enough to like completely lay out. So hammock is definitely on my list of things to add to the garden. So this is another example of there is a cover over the top of the balcony, but yet you're still able to grow plants, probably more near the opening of your balcony that get more sun. And then it looks like there's a little section next to the wall of your home that has more shade plants and a happy looking cat. But I absolutely love that you're able to have all these small pots together in a more shadier area of your balcony so that you still have plants around different sections. It's not like they're all just on one part of your deck closest to the opening, but you're able to have different plants with different light requirements in different spaces. And that is definitely something I recommend if you're either new to gardening, you haven't gardened before, or you've just moved to a new location. Spend some time, well, the best part about container gardening is that often you can move your containers around, but spend some time getting used to the space and seeing which corners might actually not get full sun or which corners do, because then you want to be able to find plants that are going to fit within those light requirements. Next up is Lorraine, also in Chicago, zone 6A. I have been following her on Instagram for a while. Her account is Larry Doom. She says, we built a rooftop deck right after we bought our condo unit, and I followed along on that journey on Instagram. It was incredible to see the transformation, and I feel like it happened super quickly, which is nice. And knew we wanted to line up some built-in planters throughout the space. We also have single pots throughout with 2 raised garden beds for vegetables and greens, an herb garden bench, perennials, and annuals. It's my garden oasis in the city, which I just feel like is the perfect way to describe having a place filled with nature in the middle of a city. Now let's pull up your garden photos. And obviously, since I've been following her, I know what her garden looks like. I don't know if you guys know people like this, but it seems like she has like an effortless chicness about her where like everything she puts together just looks beautiful. And that is something I definitely don't have, where I feel like everything is kind of always chaotic. So I love looking at her photos. I definitely get a lot of style inspiration, both from her garden, but also from the photos of the interiors of her home too. So with that, let's go ahead and pull these up. So I think this first photo here kind of goes with what I'm talking about, where it just seems like everything has such thought put into it. Everything looks beautiful together. I did ask her about the shade structure that she has, because one of the issues you'll know if you have an uncovered deck in the summer is that it can get too hot, like too hot where you don't even really want to hang out on it. It's not pleasurable to be outside in your garden. So I definitely want to invest in something like that. However, I would have to somehow build like the don't know the technical word for it, the pieces of wood that are going very far up to attach the shade structure to. But I love it. I love the seating area. I love the built-in planters where you have, looks like some grasses in there and some flowers in the pots on the table. There are also some hanging baskets and then plants obviously along the back area. I also love the kiddie pool. So let's take a look at the Sleepy Puppy by the pool, which again, I feel like the pool, like you're able to coordinate the kiddie pool to match with the aesthetics of your garden. I feel like my brain doesn't work that way, so I absolutely love seeing things like this. I also love that you have a whole wall of planters built in on the back of your deck. That is the dream. I've tried sort of recreating that with elevated beds that I bought and just lined up against the wall. It doesn't, I mean, it fits, but it's definitely not as space efficient as if it would have been built in specifically for that back wall. So I love that. There's also a section here of pots on, I think that is a bench that it's sitting on, which benches are a great way to add elevation. And I find that a lot of times benches are less expensive than getting like actual plant stands. So I would definitely recommend looking for items like that, especially at like estate sales or thrift stores. But this is great. I mean, there's a bunch of herbs. I even see a hanging basket in the top right. So again, using the vertical space that you have is fantastic. I love the look of your garden. So you might be wondering if I just did a costume change in the middle of the video, and no, it's just a whole other day. So I gave myself an hour when I started this video because I had somewhere to be and I thought an hour would be more than enough time to get through the gardens for part 1 of this video. And then an hour happened and I'd only talked about 4 gardens because I kept going off on tangents. So hopefully when I edit this video, I can narrow down a bit of what I was saying. So now we're gonna jump in. I'm gonna go through the rest of the gardens for this part, and then I will do part 2 as well. And hopefully each of these videos aren't super long. So the next garden we are gonna look at is Grow For Me 5B here on YouTube and Instagram. I've been lucky enough to meet Eric and Christopher in person a couple times, and I think I'm gonna see them again this year for some fun plant events. But they have a yard, which is absolutely beautiful. And then they also have a section of elevated beds. So I definitely wanted to include their garden because again, I get a lot of inspiration from their garden, even though they're not gardening on a deck or balcony. So they are located in upstate New York. They are zone 5B. And their space, they have elevated beds on their patio. There are 2 beds that are 2 feet by 8 feet with arched trellises. There are 2 2x4 beds with plant supports, and then 2 2x2 beds. It says these beds were installed in June 2022, so we've only had about a year to play with them. You've done fantastic with them so far, even in that short period of time. We purchased them from Garden Supply and stained them with Vermont Natural Coatings Ploy Away Food Safe Stain in charcoal. We have successfully grown potatoes, carrots, broccoli, cabbage, zucchini, tomatoes, strawberries, various herbs, and artichokes in them. The soil in the elevated beds must be potting mix due to the weight, so we chose a sterile mix that we could add our own organic fertilizer to. They're not set up on drip yet. That is on the list for 2024. You will love having drip set up to all of these beds. So their elevated beds are what I would do in my garden. I would just copy paste if I didn't already have elevated beds in my garden. So my elevated beds, I started getting, I think in 2019 through 2021, or maybe I even got some last year. And if I was ever going to replace the elevated beds up here, I would have to remove all the soil, put it somewhere. I would have to take the bed apart and I would have to carry it down to the ground level, so down 2 flights of stairs. And nothing about that sounds appealing, no matter how much I wish I had these raised beds. Because 1, I love the color that they stained them. I think black really makes plants pop. So I would love to have, even if I'd stained, I think my planters a little bit darker, I think I would have liked that as well. What I also love are these arches. So I've actually gone to the Gardener Supply website to see if the arches would work in my beds, and they don't, because it seems, well, these don't, but I might have an arch coming soon for the holidays. But these arches, which I love so much in the beds, fit onto the edges of the beds themselves. They don't go into the soil. So the dimensions of my bed and how it's set up wouldn't work with these arches. But like I said, I am potentially going to have some other options coming up for next garden season. Why I love the arches so much is, again, limited space, utilizing any vertical space, and these seem very sturdy because I do have to worry about the wind up here, and I can't see an instance where the wind would somehow blow these away. So I wish that I did have elevated beds in my garden that had some of these arches just to give me even more space to grow plants. So there's the arches here, there's the trellis in that bed. I just think these would have been perfect for my garden. But of course, hindsight is 2020. I had no idea what would really work best. I just kind of started gathering beds. But if there's ever a time that, again, don't like to think about actually having to do this, but if there's ever a time when I have to get rid of my beds, I would definitely get these beds and everything that comes with them. So maybe at some point in the future, or maybe I'll just continue to look at Eric and Christopher's and pretend that they are mine. And then this is a shot of their entire yard, which now makes me want a yard, even though this whole video is about not needing a yard to garden. One thing they do have that I love is their hydrangea hedge along the back fence. I am going to attempt to create something with that kind of thought process in mind, something similar in my garden. It will not look anything like this because, one, I don't have all the same type of hydrangea, and two, they will not grow as large as they are in this image. But I am going to try to create a wall of hydrangea hedges in my back deck garden next spring with the hydrangeas that I currently have. So Proven Winners sent out 4 or 5 maybe in the fall. So they're overwintering in the garage, assuming they survive and come back next spring. I'm gonna plant them all up. I still need to figure out exactly where, but I love the idea of a hydrangea hedge in my garden. So I'm gonna try to make that work in pots. And of course, I'll take you along with me as I attempt that. Next up is Kimberly West from Philadelphia, Growing Zone 7B. Her Instagram account is Urban Garden Musings, and she says that I garden in a small backyard space, which is about 20 by 40 feet in size. I started gardening in 2019 with 4 small Proven Winners quickfire hydrangeas in the flower bed and continued from there. My garden includes a small flower bed, 1 small raised bed, and the remainders in containers. I often feel every plant selection is a big decision because the space is small. Yes, I definitely feel that as well. However, working in containers, it gives one the freedom to try something new each year. I have a few shrubs that I favor and make those my foundation in the largest planters, but everything else changes with each year. I try to expand my knowledge and task myself with mastering another area of gardening each year. In 2023, I started more plants indoors than any year before, including dahlias, vincas, petunias, gladiolas, calla lilies, and begonias. This year, I'll try my hand at installing an irrigation system. Let's make irrigation the thing for 2024. Now, she included a before, which is fantastic to see because I'm excited to see what this is going to turn into. So right now it looks like there's obviously the cement, I don't know if it's driveway or patio, and then an area that is just tarped over. So let's go ahead now and look at, oh, that was from 2019. So now here is what it looked like in 2023. Yes, that is a big difference and I love it. Just the amount of color that is there now. And I can also see some plants in here that are kind of on my wish list of plants to attempt to grow. But it looks like here there are some beds that you've laid out. There are a ton of pots. I love the evergreens and pots that you have. I also think maybe I see some Supertunia bubblegum vista in that small pot over there. But this layout I absolutely love too. I also love all the little floral decorations that you have. So this is a complete transformation and it makes me so happy to see the difference. Here is another angle from the patio table of all of the plants that you have. I think that looks like a smoke bush. Let me see if there's, I think there was a close-up photo of that because I love smoke bushes. I first saw one on our regular walks that we do around the neighborhood. One of our neighbors has a giant one in their parkway and I didn't know what it was, but it was again kind of that maroony color and there were just little puffs coming off of it. And I was like, what is this plant? And so I took a picture, uploaded it to Google, and it said it was a smoke bush. So that's been on my list ever since then. And it's a few years now that it's been on my list as a plant that I want to try in a container. And here is the close-up of it, a Winecraft smoke bush, and then a petunia in front of it. Here is also the quickfire hydrangea from 2020 versus 2022. None of the hydrangeas I have are in the tree form. They're all more of like a typical shrub, but this looks beautiful and it would be a great way to get even more height in the garden. So maybe I need to look for something like that. I say as I already think I don't have enough space for the plants that I currently have, but always willing to try to shove more up on my garden deck. And then here are more plants that I want to try in containers. Hostas, I have some in the parkway, but again, I really like the look of them spilling over a container. And if I can get those to come back, that's just another perennial in my garden that I don't have to worry about planting something new. You also have here some heuchera, which is a great way to add even more color to the garden. Now the only issue, again, I kind of deal with is full sun, but if you have a shadier section of your deck, I think perennials like heucheras and hostas are a great addition. Next up is Linda. She lives in Brooklyn, New York, and her growing zone is 7B, which I don't think I realized that New York City was that much warmer than Chicago. We're 6A here, 7B there. Her Instagram account is Brooklyn Terrace Garden. And she says, I garden on a 10 by 18 foot terrace on the 3rd floor. It is south facing, but we have walls from the neighboring buildings on both sides that block some morning and afternoon sun. The containers I use are only grow bags, plastic containers, and terracotta pots. I can't have raised beds because I rent, but that's probably a good thing because I have more flexibility on the layout. When I moved into our apartment and started having plants outside, I religiously watched your videos since you are really the only resource out there for urban container gardening. So thank you. And thank you for saying that. Again, that's what I was really hoping for, is to encourage more people who live in the city, or if you don't live in the city but you don't have a yard, maybe you are renting a place that just has a small balcony off of the window, you can still grow plants there. And then of course the purpose of this video is to connect people with even more container gardeners so that we all can find someone who might be in a very similar situation to us. Just in case I'm showing you some things that might not necessarily apply, maybe there's someone else who has a more similar environment that you can pull ideas from. So thank you so much for saying that. Now let's take a look at your garden, which I already know that you have a cat because, again, following your Instagram account. So now let's take a look at your photos, and I did pull up the one with your kitty in them first. I absolutely love the collection that you have here of the pots. I feel like it's a very well laid out space. Everything looks really pretty. Even, I don't know if you intended to do this or not, but even like you chose terracotta pots and also the beige grow bags. And I feel like that all kind of goes together. It coordinates really well. And then I can also see what you mean by the walls on the side. So yeah, even though you have a southern exposure, again, something that can be an issue in cities very often is there are tall buildings next door to you. Fingers crossed that doesn't happen to us. I mean, right now there are no buildings that are blocking the sun from us, but something can always be built. So that's always something that I am a bit nervous about living in the city. Now let's look at your gomphrena, because I always love seeing that on Instagram. You have a ton of different varieties here, which is great. I also see some zinnias, which are another one of my favorite plants. And then growing up, I don't know if the plants in the back are using the screen as part of a trellis or not. It kind of looks like they might be. So that's great too, that you have those bars in the back that obviously when they were built, weren't built for a garden trellis, but to repurpose some of the structure that exists there already to help grow your plants. But let me see if I can identify the gomphrena. It might be Audrey Purple. I think I see Carmine there. I don't know if the red is Strawberry Fields or not. Maybe QIS Pink. That's me guessing based on the colors that I've grown so far in the garden. But it's such a luscious space, again, and you aren't even using any super large containers or large elevated beds, and you can still fill your space with plants. Here's a closer look at some of the plants that you're growing on one of the sides of the collections of the pots. Oh, I actually see, if you look in the back right corner, I don't know if you installed that piece of wood or if that again was something that existed that you then decided to utilize by putting the pot on, but that's a great way to add even more vertical height to your garden by raising that pot up. Oh, and I love this shot too with the book and the hammock. Sorry, I have to like zoom in there to see how, okay, I love how, yeah, again, you're using the railings there to set up your hammock. I really want a hammock in my garden. I'm gonna have to figure that out for next year. Some way to get a hammock up here that won't take up a lot of space, because if we have to use a frame that comes with hammocks, I don't know if I want to like utilize that much space in my garden for it. I don't know, we'll have to see. Hammock pending for my garden. The next submission is from Katie in Estonia, zone 5. My garden is a small, thin balcony, 5 meters long and 1.5 meters wide. The sun shines on the balcony in the afternoon and in the evening, so it's partial shade. I have most of the flowers in balcony hanging planters or window flower boxes and oval railing planter pots, but I also use large containers for growing perennials by the wall. And this is probably what first came to my mind when I was thinking about doing this video, because there are a lot of balconies like this in Chicago where it really is only a few feet out of your window and then it's very long. So I wanted to show that you can still grow a ton of plants in a balcony that's that size. So this looks like a collage of the different photos. So I will zoom in as I look through these. But first of all, you can see how many flowers are hanging actually like outside of the balcony. So by having a planter that hangs facing the outside, that obviously takes up less space of the balcony that you actually have to hang out in or sit in, or maybe you want to grow even more plants in that area. But I like finding containers that will hang outside of the space that you're in. Now, you do want to be careful if you're like watering, and water might fall on somebody on the sidewalk below, but I don't know if that actually pertains to your situation. It's something I had to think about when I was watering on a balcony. I had to make sure that like no one was walking underneath when I did water. I also see in the back a hanging basket, and then along the wall of the home, you have a plant stand, which again is great because there's multiple levels there. So, I mean, maybe a plant stand, let's say it's like 8 inches in depth, 10 inches in depth, but then you have 3 different levels on the plant stand. You can fit a lot more plants that way than if you just had 1 row of plants along that same section. And then back, there is a trellis that I see, and I don't know if I can tell what that is growing up it, but I definitely recommend trellises if you do have a smaller space like this, because you can grow something really beautiful that again takes up a very small footprint, whether it's vining flowers, whether it's something like peas. It's a really great way to just utilize even maybe a few inches away from your wall and grow a bunch of plants in a small space. So I like the combination of everything you have here. And again, you also still have a table and a chair, so there's enough space for you to sit and enjoy your garden while still growing a bunch of plants in a space that's not necessarily very large. So again, this is what I was kind of thinking of, the spaces that I normally see walking around the city that might be smaller balconies, where people might think, oh, well, it's too small for me to grow anything out here. But you can see from this example how many plants you can actually fit in a space that size. Next up is Pam from Wisconsin, zone 5B. I have a large deck with 60 pots of flowers, including the following: petunias, hardy hibiscus, salvia, vermilion, begonias, sunflower zinnias, sweet potato plants, lantana, gomphrena, yes, geraniums, and coneflowers. The garden gets sun from the east, and I have many other flowers around the back side of the deck, including 8 hardy hibiscus plants. I'm excited to see your hibiscus because you must have been the person I was talking to in the comments. That's something I go back and forth on if I want to put in my garden or not. So I'm excited to see yours. So now let's go ahead and take a look at your garden. And the first photo I'm pulling up here has the hibiscus in it. So first of all, again, I love the amount of color that you have here. At least in this section, it seems like there is a color scheme of the red and the pink and the white. Everything looks so pretty together. The hibiscus does fit in very nicely. My thinking has always been like, I love the plant, I love the flowers, but when I grew an elephant ear in my garden, it felt too tropical, and I was wondering if it would feel too tropical for my garden, but I love how it looks in your garden, and I don't think it feels out of place or too tropical at all. So I think you've probably convinced me to get a hardy hibiscus for my garden. This photo is from a slightly different angle. I think that might be the same hibiscus that I was looking at before. I see the lantana here, more yellow flowers in this corner. I think I again see Super Petunia Bubblegum Vista. And again, the utilization of the vertical height here, because I can see a little bit of the railing, which is covered with plants, which is how I love it when my garden turns out, where you can't really see what's actually growing the plants because everything's just covered in flowers. But again, the difference in heights here with the elevation of some pots on the ground, some pots up on the railing, taller versus shorter plants. I love the combination here in this corner. Oh, and then look at this view. There's even more hydrangeas. Is that 3 different hydrangeas in the back? And then I don't know if it's 1 or 2 kind of in the mid border there. This is stunning. And then all the petunias. Oh, I feel like you just have like my favorite flowers all together in this one photo, and it's making my heart so happy. I absolutely love that. Here's another photo from her garden, really showing you again using the different vertical height containers. So there's some that are resting on top of the deck, there's some that are sitting on the ground, some that are sitting on tables, and it just adds so much more interest to the garden. I feel like all of your like views of your garden are just stunning. Next up is Dominica from France, growing zone 8. Her Instagram account, and she also has a YouTube channel here as well, is 17M2 Garden. She says, I garden on my northeast facing terrace in the city center of Lyon, France. We are in hardiness zone 8 with hot, humid summers and rainy winters. My biggest challenges are strong winds and only 3 to 4 hours of sunlight in the morning. However, I try to make the most of my 17-meter square balcony, which is 183 square feet. I garden year-round, and my garden consists mainly of perennial and evergreen plants, but I also grow shade-tolerant edibles and seasonal flowers, which I love to sow from seeds. So I wanted to make sure to include her garden in this video because, again, I think, well, one, it always looks beautiful throughout the seasons, and it again shows gardening in a different environment than mine, whereas she doesn't get a lot of sunlight per day. And that might lead some people in that same situation to think, well, I can't grow much, or shouldn't bother growing anything at all because I don't have full sunlight. But let's take a look at her garden so you can see that that is not true. So here is her garden in the summer, and look how many plants she has, how much color she has, again, in not a full sun environment. I just think that her garden is stunning. Her color combinations are always beautiful. She has planters up on the railing. She has terracotta pots, again, at different levels in the garden. She has evergreens. Like she said, most of her garden is perennials, which is very different from what I do in my growing situation. So she's really inspired me to add more perennials to my garden, because it is a great way to save yourself, well, money, even though I'd probably still spend a lot of money on my garden, even if I did have more perennials, but a way to save money, a way to know that, you know, this plant is gonna come back every year in this space. I don't have to worry about planning for what's gonna be here. I know she also does a lot of bulb planting as well. So this is the garden in the summer, and then I believe she sent, well, before we go to the other seasons and how it looks, she is also the gardener that I mentioned has a lot of hostas or shade plants in containers. So this is her shade plant section, and look how cute this is. Again, with the terracotta pots all in this section, a bunch of different plants that do really well in the shade. I don't know, is that a Japanese maple? I think it is a Japanese maple tree there. But even also the ladder that she has there, made with branches from a tree. It really brings the space together and makes it look really beautiful in a balcony environment that somebody probably wouldn't imagine they can create a beautiful garden in. So even if you do have a shady environment, you can have something that looks as beautiful as this. Now let's take a look at her garden in the other season. Let's do spring first. So yes, here are a bunch of the bulbs that she will plant in the fall. And then I know that with the window boxes, I believe she switches those out throughout the seasons as well. She always does really beautiful compositions. I think I even see here, is that ivy growing up some sort of structure kind of in the center of the garden there. So that's spring. We've looked at summer. Now let's go ahead and look at her fall photo, which again incorporates lighting into the garden, which makes it really beautiful and just feel very homey, very relaxing. So I love that she set that up there. You can see the difference now in what was in the spring pots, which were daffodils and other bulbs, and now there are, trying to look as close as I can there, I see some grasses. I can't tell exactly what the colorful plants are, what the purple and white plants are there, but switching it up throughout the seasons is something that she does a really great job of. And then also something that is inspiring to me is how her garden looks in the winter. Whereas my garden right now is pretty much just the brown deck and brown tarp and empty beds. She does a really great job of still having winter interest. Now, obviously her growing zone is warmer, but I still think I can find plants that can handle 6A in the winter in pots, not me needing to move them up against the house or wrap them up for extra insulation. I think I can find stuff like that. I really, really want to, because I love how this garden still looks in the winter. It would make me happy to still go out there and sit in the garden despite being a little cold, whereas nothing about my garden right now in the winter makes me want to go outside and enjoy it. So that's definitely something I want to think about in the future, and creating a space that looks good throughout the entire year. Next up is John from Arizona, Growing Zone 9B. His Instagram account is John's_plant_adventures. Again, everyone's accounts that I do have will be listed in the description, so you can find them and follow them. And then if I wasn't able to find yours because I didn't have the form yet, let me know in the comments and I will add it to the description. His garden space is a magical cut flower garden that meets container gardening. So he's another one where he does have a yard, but he has a section that is just containers and is making me really want to do something very similar in my garden. So let's take a look at his photos. Look at this. Look at how pretty this is. I don't know if all of these are in containers or if the back row is planted in the ground, but you can see here at least the first 1, 2, maybe the third layer in this garden is all pots. And what I like that he does, well, there's a lot of things I like, that I don't find myself doing as much that I want to start doing is, I think, like if I had a yard, I would get 3 or 4 of the same plant and plant a drift, because that in my head makes sense in a yard. Whereas in containers, I feel like oftentimes I'm just plopping whatever plant I happen to have randomly in a space and not really thinking about using all of the containers together to create a design. Whereas obviously here, all of the containers are thought out and placed to create an overall beautiful part of the garden. So for example, in the very bottom row, it's just a bunch of sweet alyssum that works kind of as the border in this bed. And that's not something I really think about doing in my container garden until I see photos like this, and then I start taking ideas from it. But to even switch the thought over to here's my border, here's my mid border, here's the foreground, instead of just throwing random containers wherever I want. You also clearly have a way with color, because all of these work so beautifully together. I just can't stop staring at this photo, even though you have other photos, so I should probably go show them. Okay, look at this video. This must be the same section, I'm assuming later in the year, because some of these look a little bit more full, but wow, that is absolutely stunning. Now here is another absolutely stunning part of the garden. So it looks like, I don't know if this was built by you or if it was something that you purchased, but kind of the step down shelving unit, and then it's just full of terracotta pots planted up with beautiful flowers. And what I like here is because you're using the same variety, like a lot of the same variety versus a completely different plant in every pot, it just stands out so much more. It makes for such a stunning display. And if I'm recalling correctly, he has a photo pretty recently on Instagram showing how this looks throughout the seasons. So it's something that is switched up throughout the year, and it just always looks so pretty. Now, this is making me want to do something I told myself I wasn't going to do, which is get away from smaller pots in my garden and stick to larger ones, because smaller pots dry out faster. I have to be on top of them more. They require more maintenance, whereas larger pots don't. So I told myself this year I was going to get away from small terracotta pots, and then I see this, and all I want is rows and rows of small terracotta pots. I feel like with the gardens here, like people aren't just gardeners, but also artists, just creating beautiful compositions with the plants that they have in their garden. So this is definitely inspiring, and I think, again, something that maybe you only have room for some terracotta pots, you could create something as beautiful as this in a relatively small space. Okay, so I think I'm going to wrap up part 1 there, because looking at the time on here, I have now talked for over another hour. So hopefully when I edit down what I've gone over so far, which is maybe 8 or 9 gardens, I think, it will be a video that's not 2 hours long. So I will go over the rest in a part 2 that I'll probably make in a couple weeks. I will also link down below the form in case you're watching this video now and you also either have a container garden or you do have a yard but have some containers or elevated beds in your garden. Let me know down below, fill out the form, and I will include you also in part 2. So thank you so much to everyone who participated. I absolutely love, I think almost everyone, if not everyone, I've already seen your garden because I follow you on Instagram, so I already know how much I love it. But I want to get these out there to even more people because, again, I can provide my experience, but I want to be able to connect you to other people that might have a very similar garden environment to you. So thank you so much for watching. If I didn't get your social media handle, put it down below and I'll add it to the description, and then I will see you in the next video. Bye.